He counted the bills out loud, one by one, letting each note flutter down to the restaurant floor like he was feeding pigeons in a park. 50,001, Han Tae-jin said, his voice carrying across the Aurelia room with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been told to lower it. 60. He paused, tilting his head at the woman sitting across from him, the woman who had worn her best dress tonight, who had believed, actually believed, that this was a real date. Is that enough? For the inconvenience of having to look at you all evening? The phones were already up, recording, every second. And Zuri Adeyemi sat there, 24 years old, in the dress she had sewn herself, and felt the floor open beneath her feet. If that were you sitting in that chair, surrounded by laughter, with someone reducing your entire existence to a joke they planned, before you even walked through the door, what would you do? Stay for this story, because what happened next changed everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now and turn on notifications, because the stories we tell here will follow you long after you've stopped watching. Drop a like and leave a comment with your city or country. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that restaurant. Back to that moment. Back to the night Seoul's most feared man walked through a door and saw something that made him very, very still. The reservation had been made under a name Zuri didn't recognize. That should have been the first sign. But she had been in Seoul for 14 months by then, still learning the rhythms of a city that moved faster than anything she had known back in Lagos or Atlanta, and she had told herself more than once, in the mirror of her tiny apartment near Hongdae, that she needed to stop reading danger into everything unfamiliar. The message from Seo Yuna had come on a Tuesday. I know this guy. He's been asking about you since the showcase last semester. Tall, successful, actually kind of sweet when you get to know him. Valentine's night, Aurelia room. I set it up for you because you deserve something nice, Zuri. She had read it 3 times, not because she was suspicious, because she was moved. 14 months of professors who praised her technical skill in one sentence and suggested she reconsider her target market in the next. 14 months of casting directors who told her models with more conventional proportions photographed better under Korean studio lighting. 14 months of being the only black woman in most rooms she entered, and learning very quickly that some rooms would simply never adjust their temperature to make her comfortable. Yuna had been the exception, or so Zuri believed. They had worked adjacent tables during the winter showcase prep. Yuna doing sharp minimalist pieces in ivory and bone, Zuri constructing something enormous and alive in deep indigo and copper thread that she had sourced herself from a vendor in Itaewon who imported directly from Accra. Collection had taken her 4 months. She had sacrificed sleep and 2 part-time jobs to fund it. And when the judges announced her name as the showcase winner, the first thing she did was look across the room a friendly face. Yuna had been smiling. She just hadn't realized until much later what kind of smile it was. Valentine's night in Seoul has its own specific pressure. It isn't the gentler version of the holiday that some cultures observe. Here it lands harder, more commercial, more visible couples everywhere. Restaurants lit like jewelry boxes, the city performing romance at full volume. Zuri had spent the previous 2 Valentine's days either working or alone in her apartment, watching films she had seen too many times, and there had been a particular quality to that loneliness that she didn't let herself examine too closely. So she got dressed. The midnight blue dress had taken her 3 weeks. Not because the construction was complicated. She had been sewing since she was 9 years old, sitting beside her grandmother in their house outside Ibadan, learning that fabric had a memory, that it held the intention of whoever cut it. No, the dress took 3 weeks, because she kept stopping. Kept standing in front of her small full-length mirror and asking herself the question that had been following her since childhood like a shadow that arrived before the sun. Is this too much? Not the dress. The dress was perfect. She knew it was perfect the way she knew when a seam was off, by 2 millimeters, even without measuring it. She meant herself, her body. The fullness of her, the weight and curve and presence of her, the way she simply could not disappear into a room, the way she had sometimes wished she could, In the years before she understood that visibility was not actually the problem. She finished the dress. She wore it. She walked into the Aurelia room at 7:45 on Valentine's night, and the maitre looked at her once, then looked at his reservation book with the particular expression of a man doing arithmetic he didn't like. "The Ryu party table," as he began. "I'm here for the table under Park," she said. The name Yuna had given her. Park reservation. 8 o'clock. He found it, led her to a table near the center of the room. Not by a window, not tucked into a quiet corner, the center. Open, visible from almost every angle. She didn't think about that until later. Han Tae-jun arrived at 8:13. He was exactly the type she might have expected from Yuna's description: tall, expensively dressed, the kind of man who had learned early that his face was an asset and had built habits around that knowledge. He walked through the Aurelia room like he owned the air in it. Heads turned. A server actually stepped backward to let him pass without being asked. Zuri stood as he approached the table. The moment he saw her, the full, unfiltered moment, not a glance, but a settling of his gaze that lasted almost 2 seconds, something moved behind his eyes that she recognized immediately. She had seen it before, the recalibration, the subtle adjustment of expectation downward. She chose to ignore it. "Tae-jun?" She extended her hand. American habit she'd never fully lost. "I'm Zuri. It's good to meet you." He didn't take the hand right away. He looked at her for one more second. Then he shook it, briefly, and sat down without waiting for her to sit first. The evening went sideways in increments. That was the thing she would keep returning to afterward, not a single explosion, not one obvious moment when she could have stood up and walked out with certainty. It was calibrated, almost surgical. He ordered wine without asking what she preferred, then mentioned the price of the bottle in a way that wasn't quite a boast but wasn't quite casual either. He asked her about her degree program in a tone that suggested he found the answer mildly amusing before she gave it. He used English when he spoke to her and Korean when he spoke to the servers, and the switch was always just fast enough that she caught only pieces of what he said to them. One server came back to the table with an expression Zuri couldn't fully interpret. Not quite pity, something adjacent to it. She told herself she was reading too much into things. She told herself this because it was easier, and because she was 24 years old, and she wanted, badly and specifically, to have a good night. Then the phone came out. It didn't happen all at once. First, it was just him checking something messages. She assumed, the standard modern rudeness that had become so normalized it barely registered. Then he tilted the screen in a way that seemed, from certain angles, like he might be photographing the food. The food was beautiful. The Aurelia room served the kind of dishes that existed partly as photography subjects. She didn't think anything of it. But then she noticed the angle had shifted, and his thumb was moving in the particular pattern of someone running a live stream, not just taking pictures. She felt the realization arrive in her stomach before it reached her brain. She kept her face still. Her grandmother had taught her that, too, not from cruelty but from necessity. Your face is yours. Don't give it away too cheaply. She kept her face composed, and she said quietly, "Are you filming this?" "Just documenting a cultural experience," he said. His Korean was fast enough that she couldn't catch the beginning, but she heard the laughter from a nearby table. People who had clearly understood something she hadn't. 2 of them had their own phones out now. The floor was still solid beneath her feet, but she could feel the temperature of the room changing. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she started. No misunderstanding. Tae-jun set his phone down on the table, face up, the livestream indicator clearly visible. Red dot. Active. She could see the comment count climbing in her peripheral vision. "I think I was very clear with Yuna about what this evening was." And there was the name, dropped with a particular carelessness that told her it was deliberate. "What did you tell Yuna?" she said. "That I needed content." He smiled. Not at her. At the phone. "Valentine's content. You know how it is. I needed something that would..." He paused, choosing the word with visible pleasure, "perform well." Zuri put her hands flat on the table. "Something that would perform well," she repeated. "Foreign women always do," he said. And then he looked at her. really looked at her, and she watched him decide to stop pretending. Especially when there another pause, another selection, enthusiastic about their appearance. The nearby table laughed again, louder this time. Someone behind her said something in Korean, and she caught one word, sighs. The next 4 minutes were the ones she would never fully describe to anyone. Not because she couldn't find language for them. Language was something she had always been good at, precise and specific with words the way she was with fabric, but because some experiences resist narration. They sit in the body differently than they sit in the mind. Tae-jun talked. He talked to the phone, mostly narrating. The stream was somewhere between a prank video and a commentary segment, the kind of content that performed outrage and amusement simultaneously. He described her dress that she had made with her own hands over 3 weeks, as something that appeared to have lost its way. He remarked on her skin tone with the studied casualness of someone who believed cruelty became acceptable when framed as observation. He mentioned her weight twice, each time with a kind of theatrical surprise, as if he encountered something genuinely unexpected rather than a human body that had existed in the world for 24 years, without requiring his approval. And the room, this expensive, candlelit room with its international menu and its curated playlist, and its clientele who had all presumably at some point in their lives been asked by someone who loved them to be kind. The room laughed. Not all of it. There were faces she noticed later that weren't laughing. A woman near the window who had gone very still. A server in the corner who had found something urgent to do with a napkin. But those faces didn't rise above the noise of the ones that did, and in that moment, what Zuri heard was the laughter. She was still sitting. She didn't know why she was still sitting. Then the money appeared. He pulled bills from his wallet, Korean won, substantial denominations, and he placed them on the table. Then he picked them up again and dropped them, one at a time. Slowly, counting, 50,000 won, 60, 70. Each bill floated down toward the table, toward the floor. For the inconvenience, for your time. He gestured at her, the whole of all of this. A bill landed on the floor near her feet, then another. Someone took a photo. She heard the shutter sound, even through the ambient noise of the restaurant. Then another shutter. Then she couldn't count them anymore. She looked up from the bills and across the room and saw Seo Yuna standing near the entrance to the bar area, phone raised, face illuminated by the screen. Watching, recording, smiling. The trap closed around her with a sound like nothing at all. Zuri had been humiliated before. Not like this, but in the way that most women who occupy bodies the world considers excessive have been humiliated slowly, incrementally, through 1,000 small redirections. Professor who suggested she designed for more marketable women. Casting director who said plus-size models were wonderful but complicated the visual narrative of a campaign. The classmate who had said without particular malice that Zuri would probably want to sort out her weight situation before her debut show, because first impressions in industry were everything. She had learned over years to process those moments quickly. To feel them fully, she had never pretended they didn't land, and then to keep moving. Not because she was unusually strong, because stopping was not actually an option, and she had too much to build. But this was different. This was designed, deliberate, constructed specifically around the parts of her that the world had always pointed at as insufficient, and assembled by someone she had believed was a friend, and performed in front of a room full of people and a live audience she couldn't even see. And she was 24 years old on Valentine's night, in a dress she had made herself, and there was money on the floor around her shoes. The restaurant director materialized beside the table. He was a compact man named Lim Sang-sheol, and he carried himself with the specific authority of someone who had spent years protecting an establishment's reputation and had developed a very particular sense of whose comfort contributed to that reputation and whose didn't. "I'm going to have to ask you," he said to Zuri, "not to Tae-jun, to settle any remaining charges, and—" "She hasn't ordered anything," someone nearby said. Not loudly, but clearly. Lim Sang-sheol adjusted his cuffs. "For the disruption to our other guests," he said. "This is a private dining establishment, and we Disruption. Zuri said the word. Just said it. Flat and clear. I understand this is upsetting. You're asking me to pay, she said, for being the victim of something that happened in your restaurant. With your staff present, we have a responsibility to the experience of all our guests. And what experience have I had? She said. What exactly do you think has been happening at this table? Lim Sang-sheol had an answer ready. She could see it in the way he'd already drawn breath. And she understood, with a cold and total clarity, that whatever he was about to say was going to be delivered in the tone of someone closing a matter rather than addressing it. She was not going to win this argument. She knew that. Not here, not tonight, not with bills on the floor, and an active live stream on the table, and a room full of people who had already decided what kind of story this was. Something inside her, not her composure, because she was still holding that with both hands, but something deeper, something she had been carefully maintaining for years. Something she had built out of necessity and named resilience, but which was also, truthfully, just exhaustion. Something cracked. Not broke, cracked. The difference mattered. She reached for her bag. The restaurant doors opened. She didn't hear them come in. Not over the ambient sound, not with everything else occupying her attention. She became aware of a change in the room before she identified its source, a shift in the quality of attention, the particular quiet that descends when something has entered a space that commands more authority than anything already in it. 4 men, moving in a formation that wasn't rushed and wasn't hesitant and communicated, in the specific language of men who moved like this professionally, that the room's existing power arrangements had just been revised. And then the man behind them. He was 34 years old, though he carried it differently than most men that age not younger, not older, but precise. Like someone who had made a decision about the exact quantity of himself he intended to present to the world at any given moment and had been keeping to that number for years. He wore a dark suit, and he wore it without effort, the way people wear things that have been made for their particular body and no other. His face was still. Not controlled, she would learn the difference later, just still. She had never seen him before. She would learn his name in approximately 90 seconds. Jae-min Ryu stopped walking about 15 feet from her table. His eyes moved across the room, not scanning, not searching, but cataloging. Taking inventory, she watched him register the phone on the table. Comment counter, still visible, the bills on the floor. The restaurant director standing over her. Tae-jun's posture of entertained satisfaction. The other phone still raised around the room. All of it, in perhaps 3 seconds. And then his eyes came to rest on her. Not on her body. Not on her dress. On her face. On the specific expression that she was wearing, which was the expression of a woman who has decided that she is not going to give anyone in this room the satisfaction of watching her dissolve. Something moved behind his eyes. Recognition, though that didn't make sense. She had never seen him before. He walked to her table. He removed his black coat slowly, without ceremony, without looking at Tae-jun or the phones or the restaurant director, and he placed it around her shoulders. The weight of it was unexpected. The warmth of it was unexpected. She didn't move. Then he turned, and the room, which had been laughing and recording and performing its own cruelty for the better part of 10 minutes, went completely, absolutely silent. Jae-min Ryu looked at Tae-jun, at the phone on the table, at the money on the floor. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Quieter than you would expect from a man whose name, she would soon learn, made security directors in 3 cities call their lawyers before answering his calls. Nobody, he said, touches her dignity again. Tae-jun's phone screen went dark. Lim Sang-sheol took 1 step backward. Around the room, phones lowered themselves. Not all at once, one by one, like a tide pulling back from a shore. And Zuri Adeyemi, 24 years old, still holding her bag, still wearing a coat that did not belong to her, felt the crack inside her hold. Not close, not reverse, just hold. She looked at the side of this stranger's face, this man whose name she didn't know yet, whose coat was around her shoulders, who had just rearranged the temperature of an entire room with 7 words and a quality of stillness she had never encountered before in a human being. And she thought, with the specific clarity that comes after sustained shock, when the body finally decides the immediate danger has shifted. Who are you? She would find out. The night, it turned out, was not over. And neither, by a significant measure, was she. The coat still smelled like cedar, and something colder winter air, maybe, or the kind of expensive restraint that doesn't advertise itself. Zuri became aware of this detail in the specific way you notice small things when your body is running on shock and your brain is trying to find anything manageable to hold on to. Cedar, clean wool, the weight of it across her shoulders, like a hand that wasn't touching her. Around her, the Aurelia room had gone into kind of suspended state. Not silent, the ambient music was still playing. Some muted jazz arrangement that now felt deeply absurd, but hushed in the way of people who have just watched something shift and aren't yet sure what the new rules are. Jae-min hadn't moved. He was still standing with his back partially to her, his attention directed at the table where Han Tae-jun sat, and the quality of that attention was the most unsettling things Zuri had witnessed all evening. It wasn't anger. It was something more patient than anger. Something that had clearly learned, over a long period of time, that rage was a resource, best spent carefully. Taejun's phone was face down on the table. He had put it down himself. That was the part nobody in the room was going to mention. Out loud, he had put it down himself, without being asked, which said everything about what Han Tae-jun understood, about the man now standing 12 feet away from him. "Get up," Jae-min said. 2 words, the volume of a normal conversation. Taejun's jaw moved, processing, calculating. He was a man who had spent years developing the specific confidence of someone who had never been in a situation he couldn't exit through money or visibility, and Zuri watched him search, very quickly, for the exit that wasn't there. "I don't think we've been introduced," Taejun said. His voice was steady. She had to give him that. "This is a private—" "Get up," Jae-min said again. Identical tone. Identical volume. Like the first time hadn't happened. One of the 4 men who had entered with Jae-min took a single step forward. 1. He didn't touch anything. He didn't say anything. But the geometry of the room rearranged itself around that one step, and Taejun felt it, because Taejun stood up. He was taller than Jae-min by perhaps 2 inches. He seemed to realize, as he rose, that this was not going to matter. "This is a misunderstanding," Taejun said. "Whatever you think you saw, I saw a live stream." Jae-min's eyes moved briefly to the face-down phone on the table, along with several thousand other people, apparently. He turned his head slightly. Not enough to look at Zuri directly, but enough that she understood she was being acknowledged. "Are you able to walk?" It took her a moment to realize he was speaking to her. "Yes," she said. The word came out more solid than she expected. "My car is outside. You don't have to get in it, but you don't have to stay in here either." He said it without looking at her, which she understood instinctively was deliberate. He was giving her the option without making it into a performance, without an audience for her response. There was a consideration in that she hadn't expected. She looked at the floor, at the bills still scattered there. She looked at Taejun's face, which had reorganized itself into the expression of a man who was already planning his next move and was simply waiting for this particular obstacle to clear. She looked at Seo Yuna, who had retreated several more feet toward the bar area, and was no longer recording, but was very much still watching. With an expression Zuri now read, with the precise accuracy of someone who has just learned to translate a language they should have been studying for months. Picked up her bag. She walked out of the Aurelia room. She did not pick up the coat. The car was black, which she had expected. Long, which she had expected. The interior was the kind of quiet that comes from engineering rather than emptiness. She sat in the back seat and looked at her hands. They were shaking. Not dramatically, not the full body shaking of someone in acute crisis, but a fine, persistent tremor that she couldn't stop by pressing her palms flat against her thighs, which she tried. Outside the window, Seoul continued as it always did, at full intensity. Indifferent to individual suffering, in the way that all large cities are indifferent, which is both cruel and oddly comforting, depending on the night. Jae-min got in approximately 4 minutes after she did. He sat on the opposite side of the back seat, There was a significant distance between them, more than strictly necessary, and he said nothing for a moment. One of his men was in the front. The car moved. "You're not going to ask me where we're going?" he said. "I assumed you'd tell me if it mattered." A brief pause. "That's an unusual amount of trust for a stranger." "It's not trust," she said. "I just don't have the capacity to be afraid of one more thing tonight." He absorbed that. She couldn't see his expression clearly in the moving dark of the car interior, just the outline of him still, composed, that same quality of deliberate presence she had noticed in the restaurant. "My name is Ryu Jae-min," he said. I know, she had heard it in the restaurant. Murmured by the maitre to someone right after Jae-min had spoken. The name had traveled through the room like a current. "Should I know who you are?" "Probably not. But you think I should be more alarmed that I'm in your car." Most people would be. Most people didn't just spend 40 minutes having their existence mocked for content. She heard how that sounded as it left her mouth blunt, borderline hostile, aimed partially at herself for sitting in a stranger's car at all. "I'm Zuri Adeyemi. I'm 24. I'm a fashion design student. I made the dress myself." She didn't know why she added that last part. He looked at her. She could feel it even without turning to meet it. "I know," he said. "My sister told me about you." The estate was in Yongsan. Not a neighborhood Zuri knew well. She had a student's geography of Seoul, organized around transit lines and cheap food and the locations of fabric vendors. But even she could register the shift in landscape as the car moved through a gate and onto grounds that belonged to a different category of existence than anything she navigated daily. She didn't say anything about it. She was too busy processing the sentence he'd said. "My sister told me about you." Inside, she was led to a sitting room that was large and warm, and not what she'd expected, which had been something colder, more deliberately intimidating. There were books on multiple surfaces. A coat left over the arm of a chair, the way a coat gets left when the person who lives there doesn't think about presentation. Coffee cup with a faint ring where it had been set without a coaster. People lived here, actually lived here. Then a voice from the doorway. "I knew it was you." The young woman was perhaps 20 slight and quick-moving, with the kind of energy that preceded her into rooms. She stopped in the doorway of the sitting room and stared at Zuri with an expression of such uncomplicated recognition that Zuri felt genuinely disoriented. "I'm sorry," Zuri said. "Have we Hongdae Station?" November, the night it rained. There were 3 of them. The young woman crossed the room with the specific purposefulness of someone who had been waiting to say this for a while. "I was stupid, and I was alone, and you walked between me and them and told them something in your English, and they left. Do you remember?" Zuri stared at her. She did remember. Partially. A late night coming back from a supplier visit, rain making the streets slick and the station underpass feel smaller than it was. A young woman pressed against the tiled wall, with 3 men making her smaller by the second. Zuri had inserted herself without exactly deciding to. It was the kind of thing that came from somewhere below, thought some older instinct that overrode self-preservation calculations. "They were drunk," Zuri said. "They were also threatening." The young woman said, "My name is Hana, Ryu Hana. That is my brother." She pointed at Jae-min, who had entered behind her, and was standing with an expression Zuri couldn't read. "I told him about you in December. I told him what you looked like. Your dress tonight." Hana stopped. "Were those really his bills? On the floor?" "Hana," Jae-min said. "I'm asking." "Yes," Zuri said. "They were his." Hana turned to her brother. The uncomplicated recognition in her face had transformed into something simpler and more absolute. "Fix it," she said. Jae-min looked at Zuri for a moment. "Sit down," he said. "I'll have someone bring tea. And then I'd like to tell you some things about Han Tae-jun that you don't know yet." The things he told her were worse than she had imagined. Not because she was naive about the existence of cruelty she wasn't, but because organized cruelty, cruelty with a system behind it, still managed to land differently than its random variety. Taejun had done this before. 3 times in the previous year, each with a different foreign woman. The sets was similar each time: an intermediary, a romantic premise, a high-end location chosen for its lighting and its willingness to look the other way. The content performed extremely well. millions of views across platforms. Brand partnerships, that his management team, had apparently developed a sophisticated rationale for maintaining through cycles of controversy. Jae-min delivered this information without editorializing. Facts and sources, the name of the management company, platforms, the view numbers. He spoke the way someone speaks who has already had this information confirmed several times and is past the point of being surprised by it. And Yuna? Zuri said, a pause, slightly longer than the others. That one is Jae-min seemed to choose more specific. Tell me anyway. He looked at her, assessing something. Then Seo Eunice has been documenting your works since the fall semester. She submitted a complaint to the university's Academic Ethics Board last month, claiming that your showcase collection incorporated design elements from her preliminary sketches without credit. Zuri felt something cold move through her. That's not, she started. I know. Her filing was reviewed and declined. There's no documentation supporting the claim, and her preliminary sketches were submitted 3 weeks after your material logs. He paused. She knows the claim failed, but she has also been in communication with Tae-jun's management company since mid-January. The room was very quiet. She pitched me, Zuri said. Not a question. She pitched the concept of you. Foreign. Black. Plus size. Design student who beat her in competition. Jae-min leaned forward slightly. To Tae-jun's team, that was, I'm using their language now, high-performance content material. The kind of video that generates not just views but sustained commentary cycles. Zuri looked at the surface of the table between them. The tea she hadn't touched. They chose me specifically because of what I look like, she said. Yes. Not incidentally, not in addition to other factors. Specifically. Yes, she had known this. Some part of her, since the moment she saw Yuna at the entrance to the bar, with her phone raised. But knowing a thing and hearing it, confirmed by someone with documentation behind it, were different experiences, and she sat with that difference for a moment without trying to accelerate past it. What are you going to do? She said. Jae-min looked at her steadily. What would you like me to do? The question surprised her. She hadn't expected it to be put back to her. She started, then stopped. She tried again. There's the right answer to that question, and there's the honest one. Give me the honest one. I want them to understand what they built, she said. Not consequence. Understanding. I want Tae-jun to sit in a room somewhere and actually comprehend that there's a person whose night that there's a person. Period. She paused. And I know that's naive. It's not naive, Jae-min said. It's just not something I know how to deliver. What can you deliver? Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Significantly more permanent consequences. That's what I was afraid of. Does it change your answer? If you destroy them because they called me ugly, she said, you're still letting them decide what I'm worth. You're still making my value the center of the transaction. She watched him. I don't want my value to be the center of the transaction. I want it to be irrelevant to the transaction. I want the transaction to be about what they actually did, legally and specifically, and what the law says about that. Jae-min was quiet for a long moment. The law is slow, he said. I know. And in the meantime, the video exists. I know that too. He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize, not the one he showed the room, not the one that had made Tae-jun put his phone down, but something narrower and more genuine, like a window left slightly open in an otherwise closed building. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone angrier. I'm furious, she said flatly. I'm just not going to let it be the loudest thing in the room. She picked up the tea. Finally, it had gone lukewarm. That's also something I learned. Not from wisdom, from watching what happens when it is. She stayed at the estate that night because Hana asked her to stay, and because Jaemin's people had already identified that the video, which had been fully live for nearly 40 minutes before the stream cut had passed 2 million views by midnight, and was generating the specific kind of online attention that made going back to her apartment feel like walking into a lit match. She slept in a guest room that was larger than her entire apartment. She did not sleep well. In the morning, Hana brought food and sat cross-legged on the end of the bed, and talked with the directness of someone who had decided that Zuri had been through enough managed distance for 1 week and deserved unfiltered company. He doesn't bring people here, Hana said. It's not as a warning. As a fact, he didn't exactly bring me. I got in his car. He let you get in his car. Hana handed her a bowl of something warm. That's the same thing for him. Zuri looked at the food. What is he, exactly? I've been trying to figure out the right question to ask. Hana was quiet for a moment. Complicated. That's not an answer. No, Hana agreed. But it's the honest one. Jae-min found her in the garden 2 hours later. Not searching for her, he had presumably known where she was. This was his property, but arriving at the spot where sitting with the deliberateness of a man who had decided to have a particular conversation, and was now having it. He sat down, not close. He had a quality of spatial awareness she was starting to notice, a consistent attentiveness to giving her room, which she suspected was not how he operated with most people. My people have been working since last night, he said. Taejun's content violated Korean information and communications laws in 4 specific ways. His management company has an ongoing tax situation that becomes considerably more visible if someone draws attention to it. He paused. The Aurelia Room has 4 undocumented migrant workers and has been operating a secondary reservation system that charges foreign guests between 20 and 40% above the posted menu price. Zuri looked at him. You found all of that since last night? I found confirmation of things I already suspected. The Aurelia Room has been on our radar for other reasons. Our radar, she said, my organization's. She waited. He said, I am not a good man in the way you might typically use that phrase. I want you to know that clearly. I have done things within the legal gray areas of this city that would, he paused, trouble you if you knew the specifics. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Why are you telling me this? Because you're going to find out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me first. That's unusually honest. I'm told it's occasionally one of my better qualities. She looked at him. The morning light was doing something particular to the geometry of his face, less architectural, more human. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with last night. Your mother, she said. Hana mentioned. Something moved through his expression so quickly she almost missed. Hana talks. She loves you. That's also true. What happened? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, my mother came to Seoul from a small city in Gyeonggi province. She worked. She always worked. She got sick 7 years ago, something that should have been treatable, something with a name and a medication and a clear course of action. Except the clinic she could afford dismissed her 3 times. The doctor who eventually took her case was the 4th she'd seen, and the first one who didn't treat her like she was wasting his time. He stopped. By then, it was too late to fix what could have been fixed in year 1. I'm sorry, Zuri said. I responded by making sure that everyone who could have helped her, and chose not to become very aware of my existence. His voice was even. Completely even. That response expanded over time. Into an empire. Into whatever you want to call it. She looked at the garden, at the February sky over Seoul, which was pale and unconvincing, like a draft of itself. You built it because you were terrified of feeling powerless again, she said. He didn't answer immediately. You're very direct, he said. You told me you weren't a good man. Seemed like a direct conversation. Another pause, and then quietly, yes. I understand that, she said. I understand it more than I'd like to. She wrapped her hands around the mug Hana had brought her. Being told you don't fit, that you take up too much space, that you're too much of the wrong things, it makes you want to fill something up so big. Nobody can ignore it. Or tear down everything that ignored you. Those are 2 versions of the same fear. He looked at her. Which version did you choose? He said. I'm still deciding, she said. Every day. Some days I decide better than others. The legal process moved the way legal processes move, not slowly exactly, but with the grinding impersonal momentum of a machine that had not been designed for urgency. Evidence of Taejun's pattern of targeted harassment reached 3 of his major brand sponsors within a week. One dropped him within 48 hours, issuing a statement of sufficient vagueness that it could be interpreted several ways. The second waited 6 days, then followed. The third held. His management company's tax situation was referred to regulators through channels that Jae-min described only as appropriately indirect. Yuna's academic misconduct, filing the one against Zuri that had been declined, was re-examined in the context of new evidence that her preliminary sketch dates had been manipulated. The university's ethics board opened a second inquiry into Yuna. The Aurelia room received 3 separate regulatory visits in 2 weeks. The undocumented workers were not deported, Jae-min had ensured, through means he didn't detail, that they were connected with labor advocacy organizations first. Lim Sang-sang Cheol resigned. The differential pricing system was documented and referred to consumer protection authorities. Zuri knew the broad outlines of these developments. Jae-min told her what he thought she needed to know, which was more than she expected and less than she suspected he knew, and she accepted this arrangement because it was the one she'd chosen when she told him she wanted lawful accountability rather than the other kind. She went back to her apartment. She went back to class. She sat in her studio and cut fabric and thought about her collection, the one she was building for the spring showcase, the one that had been accumulating in her head for months, and let the thinking be a form of motion when actual motion felt insufficient. She did not go back to the estate. Not that week. Jae-min did not contact her. She had not given him her number. He had not asked for it, which she thought about more than she intended to. Hana, however, had her number. Hana had gotten it from Zuri's jacket pocket on the second morning, extracted her own phone, and texted herself from it with the specific ruthlessness of someone who had identified a friendship and was not going to leave it to chance. On the 8th day after the Aurelia room, Hana sent, "He's been to the restaurant site twice. You know that thing he does where he stands and looks at something like he's solving a math problem? He does that about you." Zuri read the message standing in a fabric aisle in Dongdaemun. She put her phone away. She stood in the aisle for approximately 30 seconds. Then she texted back, "Tell him I want to see the evidence file before anything else moves forward." Hana replied with a single character. It was a smile emoji. The evidence file was thorough. They met at a different location this time, a building in Gangnam that looked like 40 other buildings from the outside, and contained, on its 14th floor, an office that felt like the deliberate opposite of the Aurelia room, functional, unornamented, organized around work rather than impression. Jae-min sat across a table from her and walked her through the documentation with the same even-handedness he applied to most things. She asked questions. He answered them. Twice he deferred to a man named Dorian Korean American, precise. With reading glasses he removed to speak and replaced to read, who apparently functioned as something between a legal analyst and a strategist, and who treated Zuri with the specific professional courtesy of someone who had been told to treat her well and had also, on his own, decided this was the correct approach. At one point, Taejun's name appeared in a document alongside 4 other women. 4 names she didn't know, nationality listed beside each, Vietnamese, American, Filipino, French. She stopped. Did any of them? She started. None of them filed complaints, Dorian said. 2 of them are no longer in Korea. The others, he glanced at Jae-min briefly. There are various reasons why they may not have felt filing was viable. They didn't think anyone would listen, Zuri said. That's one way to put it. She looked at the 4 names for a moment. Can they be contacted? About the current filing? We've had that conversation, Jae-min said. Their participation would be voluntary. Dorian has drafted outreach. I want to read it before it goes out. Jae-min looked at her. Why? Because they're not a resource for my case. If they choose to participate, it should be because someone talked to them, like they're people who have a right to decide, not like evidence that needs to be collected. She met his gaze. I want to read the outreach, a beat of silence. Send it to her, Jae-min said. Dorian nodded. The thing she didn't say to Jae-min, not that day, was that something was pulling at her from 2 directions, and had been for the entire week. On one side, the lawful path, the correct path, the path that treated her dignity as worth defending through systems that were supposed to exist exactly for this purpose, slow and imperfect as they were. On the other side, something she couldn't name precisely, but arrived in her studio late at night while she was cutting fabric, an awareness that the people who had constructed her humiliation had done so because they believed, with the comfortable certainty of people who have never had that certainty challenged. Stitches, that she was the wrong shape and the wrong city wearing, the wrong skin, and that this made her a target rather than a person, and that the legal process would potentially penalize. But it would not touch that belief, would not put a hand on it. The belief would survive completely intact, and tomorrow it would find another table and put another woman's worth up for a vote. She thought about this alone in her studio. She thought about her collection, about what it was becoming, about the women she was designing for, women she had always designed for. Since the first garment she'd ever finished, the women who occupied the gap between what the fashion industry sold and what human bodies actually looked like. She picked up her sketch pad. She started drawing. What came out of the pencil that night was not what she had planned. It was something larger, something that put the thing she had been told to conceal directly at the center, not as a statement, not as protest, but as simple and non-negotiable fact. This is what beauty looks like, not also, not despite. Directly and without apology, she worked until the city went quiet around her. She was still working when her phone rang, an unknown number. Late enough that normal calls didn't happen, she answered. Ms. Ademi, a man's voice, Korean accent, formal register. My name is Kong Seo-kwan. I am a colleague of Ryu Jae-min's. I apologize for the hour. A pause. I'm calling because I think there are things about your situation that Jae-min has not told you. Things you should know before this goes further. The pencil in her hand went still. What kind of things? She said. The kind, Seo-kwan said, that change whether you trust the person you've been trusting. She sat very still in her studio, surrounded by fabric and sketches and the accumulating architecture of her collection, and she felt the pull of the two directions sharpen into something entirely new. A third direction, one she hadn't seen coming. She didn't answer right away. That was the first thing. The pause before she spoke was not hesitation. It was the specific silence of someone running a rapid calculation, the kind that happens when a new variable enters a system you thought you understood. How did you get this number? She said. I have access to most things Jae-min has access to, Seo-kwan said. That's what it means to have worked beside someone for 12 years. Another pause, calibrated. She would think later everything about this call was calibrated, including his private files, including documentation of people he considers important enough to protect. The word protect landed with a specific weight. You're telling me he has a file on me, she said. I'm telling you he's been watching you since December, since before Valentine's night, since before Taejun's stream made you visible to everyone else. The voice was unhurried, patient in a way that felt practiced. I thought you should know what kind of attention you've been receiving and from whom before you decide how much of your situation to hand to him. She looked at the sketches spread across her studio table, the half-finished patterns, the collection taking shape in pencil lines she had drawn 3 hours ago with something that felt like clarity. If you have something specific to tell me, she said, then tell me. I'm not going to stay on the phone for a conversation that circles. A brief sound, not quite a laugh. Appreciation, maybe, of the directness. Come meet me tomorrow, somewhere public, wherever you choose. A pause. I think what I have to show you deserves a real conversation. She wrote down the address he gave her when she pushed back on the vagueness. She hung up. She sat in her studio for a long time after that, the pencil still in her hand, and she did not draw anything else. She didn't tell Jae-min about the call. She told herself this was because she hadn't decided yet what the call meant, which was true. She also knew, with the honesty she tried to apply to herself, that she applied to everything else, that there was another reason, that some part of her wanted to see what Seo-kwan's version of events looked like before Jae-min's version had the chance to shape how she received it. That instinct made her uncomfortable. She had trusted Jae-min more than the evidence strictly required. She was aware of that, had been aware of it since the second morning at the estate, when she'd sat in his garden and talked with him like she'd known him longer than 36 hours and felt the comfort of it without quite understanding why. Comfort was not the same as safety. She knew that. She met Seo Kwon the next afternoon in a cafe in Mapo that she chose herself. She had insisted on that a place with high ceilings and enough ambient noise that a private conversation required leaning in, but was not impossible. He was already there when she arrived. Sixth, she guessed. Compact and still, the stillness of a man who had spent decades making himself readable only when he chose to be. He stood when she entered, which was a small thing, and gestured to the seat across from him, and waited until she was settled before he sat back down. Manners that functioned as a kind of armor. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I haven't decided yet whether I should have," she said. "Show me what you have." He opened a folder, physical documents paper, not a screen which she recognized as a choice. Paper couldn't be remotely accessed or altered in real time. Paper was a statement of finality. "Jae-min has been aware of Han Tae-jun for 6 weeks, Seo Kwon said. "Not because of you. Because Tae-jun made a business decision last year that intersected with one of Jae-min's distribution networks in a way that created a problem." He turned a page toward her. "This is documentation of that intersection. The short version is that Tae-jun's management company was laundering content revenue through a shell structure that Jae-min's people also used independently for legitimate tax management. When Tae-jun's activity drew regulatory attention, it created exposure for Jae-min's structure as well." Zuri looked at the document. Financial language largely, but the names were legible. Tae-jun's management company, a subsidiary she didn't recognize. And there a holding name she had seen before, in the evidence file Dorian had walked her through. He was already building a case against Tae-jun, she said. He was already removing Tae-jun from a situation that created liability, Seo Kwon said. The Valentine's night event, your involvement accelerated a timeline that already existed. She sat with this. You're saying he would have moved against Tae-jun, regardless of what happened to me. I'm saying the outcome for Tae-jun was already determined before you walked into the Aurelia room. He turned another page. I'm also saying that your presence in Jae-min's life, the public nature of it, the attention it has brought, creates complications for people who have spent years keeping his operations insulated from exactly this kind of visibility. People like you, she said. People like me, he confirmed, without apparent embarrassment. I'm not pretending my concerns are purely on your behalf. But the facts are still facts. She looked at the table, at the documents, at the careful arrangement of information that was designed, she understood, to do a specific thing to how she saw Jae-min. He was protecting a business interest, she said slowly. And I happen to be a not convenient, Seo Kwon said. Genuinely useful. The public framing of your situation, the humiliated woman, the mafia boss stepping in it, created a moral narrative that made Jae-min's intervention look protective rather than transactional. A pause. I'm not saying he invented the feeling. I think he may actually. Another pause, shorter. The situation with my sister is real. His reaction to you is real. But real feeling and strategic usefulness are not mutually exclusive. They rarely are, in my experience. She was quiet. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because I have been with Jae-min since before his mother died. I have watched what this organization cost him, what it cost the people around him. He closed the folder slowly, with the deliberateness of someone who wanted her to register the action. And I believe you are making him want things he cannot safely have, which means you are also making him make decisions that put people at risk, including you. You're asking me to leave, she said. I'm asking you to see clearly. He met her eyes. What you do with clear sight is your choice. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at him for a long moment at the composed face, the careful hands, the document folder he had brought to a cafe in Mapo to show a 24-year-old fashion student why she should stop trusting the most powerful person who had ever decided she mattered. I need to think, she said. She walked out. She sat in the cold outside the cafe for 7 minutes before she could make herself move toward the subway. She called Hana, not Jae-min. Hana, who picked up on the second ring with the immediacy of someone who had been waiting for a call without knowing which call it would be. I need to ask you something, Zuri said, and I need you to answer it like you would if your brother wasn't involved. Pause. That's a hard condition. I know, try anyway. Okay. Did Jae-min know about Taejin before Valentine's night? Not about the setup about Taejin himself. Did he already have a problem with him? The pause was longer this time. Long enough that Zuri felt her chest tighten. Hana. Yes, Hana said quietly. He knew. He didn't tell me details. But I knew he knew, the way you know things in this family without being told explicitly. Another pause. Zuri, was I useful to him? In how it looked, the way he stepped in, the way it positioned him. I don't think it's that simple. Hana, was I? I don't know, Hana said finally. And that's the honest answer. I genuinely do not know whether it started as or whether it became something different once he's Zuri. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks when your name comes up, and I'm not saying that to. That's okay, Zuri said. Zuri, I just needed to know what you knew. Thank you. She hung up. She stood on the sidewalk outside Mapo Station and felt the city move around her relentless, undifferentiated, indifferent in the way she usually found oddly stabilizing, and today found simply cold. She had built her read of Jae-min on a set of observations she believed were reliable. His stillness, his consistency, the way he'd given her room always without being asked. The fact that he'd told her himself that he wasn't a good man, which she had received as honesty, but which could also be read as the most effective version of managing expectations. She thought about the document folder, the holding company name she recognized. She thought about a man in his 30s who had built an empire from grief and fear, who was perfectly capable of wanting something genuine and strategically useful at the same time, who had spent 12 years surrounding himself with people who executed his decisions rather than challenged them. She thought about what it would mean if she was wrong about him. She walked to the subway. She went back to her studio. She did not contact Jae-min that night or the next morning. He came to her. Not to her apartment, she was in the university studio, alone. It was early enough that the building was mostly empty, and the hallways had that particular acoustic quality of large institutional space before they fill up. She heard the door at the end of the hall and looked up and knew, before she saw him, that it was him, from the particular weight and pattern of the footsteps. She had learned the sound of him faster than she was entirely comfortable with. He stopped in the doorway of the studio. He looked at the table, the sketches, the fabric samples, the new direction of the collection spreading across every surface. He looked at her face. You talked to Seo Kwan, he said. Not a question. She put down the fabric she was holding. Yes. He called you, yes. He came into the room. Not toward her. He moved to the side, to the wall, which put him further from her rather than closer, giving her the room again, even now. The consistency of that was the thing she couldn't dismiss, even when she was trying to. What did he tell you? Jae-min said. That you had a prior conflict with Taejun. Business-related. That the case against him was already in motion before Valentine's night. She looked at him steadily. That my situation was useful to you. Publicly. Narratively. He didn't deny it immediately, which she had halfway expected him to, and which she realized now she had been dreading not the denial itself, but the ease of it. The practiced quality that would mean she had misread him more completely than she could afford. He said all of that is true. She felt something release in her chest. Not relief, something more complicated than relief. Then tell me the rest, she said. The conflict with Taejun was about financial structure. My people identified his management company's activity in December and began building documentation to force a separation from the shared structure. It had nothing to do with you. He paused. Valentine's night changed the timeline but not the direction. And the narrative, she said, the way it looked. Me and you. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him find the words, which he did carefully, like someone who had learned to be precise because imprecision had cost him before. I don't know how to cleanly separate what I calculated from what I felt, he said. I'm not certain that's possible. For me, the way I'm built. I saw you in that room, and I recognized something. Coat was not strategy. But I also knew, in the same moment, that my presence would change what happened next in ways that served multiple interests, including my own. He met her eyes. I didn't manufacture my reaction to what I saw. I also can't tell you it was entirely free of context. That's an honest answer, she said. It's the only one I have. She looked at the sketches on the table. Seo Kwan wants me gone. I know. He thinks I'm making you make different decisions. Worse decisions, from his perspective. You are, Jae-min said simply. Different ones. I'm still evaluating whether they're worse. She looked at him. He called you predictable. The old version of you. He said your anger made you predictable, and I'm making you unpredictable. A pause. He said that makes me dangerous. Jae-min was very still. When did he say that, he said. On the phone. Before the meeting. Something in his stillness sharpened, and she caught it. What is it? Seo Kwan doesn't. He stopped. Started again. He doesn't use that word carelessly. Dangerous has a specific operational meaning in the way he speaks. She felt the cold move through her again. Different quality than before. More immediate. Jae-min, I need to make a call. He already had his phone out. Don't go anywhere. What's happening? Probably nothing. He was already moving toward the door, phone at his ear. Stay in this room. I'm going to have someone come to the building. Jae-min Zuri, he stopped, turned. And the face he showed her in that moment was stripped of most of its managed quality, not the composed surface, not the deliberate stillness, but something underneath those things, something that had been there longer and ran deeper. I should have told you about Tae-jun, the prior conflict. I should have told you myself before he did. Yes, she said. You should have. I know, a beat. I will explain everything. All of it. But first I need to know that Seo Kwan's call last night was only a call. He left. She stood in the studio and listened to the sound of his footsteps moving quickly down the institutional hallway, and she felt the shape of the next few hours assembling themselves around her like weather. It took 4 days for the next thing to happen. 4 days during which Jae-min's people swept her apartment, her studio, her devices, and found nothing. During which Seo Kwan was apparently unreachable for 36 hours and then reappeared with an explanation involving a family matter in Busan that Jae-min received with the particular quality of attention he applied to information he did not believe. During which the legal proceedings against Tae-jun advanced in 3 specific ways that Dorian reported to her directly, at her insistence, without going through Jae-min. During which she finished the primary architecture of her showcase collection and sent the technical specifications to the seamstress cooperative in Itaewon she had been working with for a year, women who made things with the precision of people who understood that their work would be looked at closely. During which she did not sleep more than 5 hours on any single night. The video happened on the 5th day. She found out about it from Hana, who texted at 7 in the morning with a link. And 3 words, don't watch alone. She watched alone. It was assembled from footage she didn't recognize, some of it clearly taken, without her knowledge, angles that suggested surveillance, a restaurant she had visited once with Hana, the outside of her apartment building, her studio window from across the street, interspersed with clips from Tae-jun's original live stream, with comments overlaid, with a voiceover in Korean, that she ran through a translation app with hands that had resumed their fine tremor. The translation was imperfect, but the meaning was clear enough. Foreign woman, using mafia connections to destroy a Korean content creator who expressed honest opinions. Deliberately cultivating powerful men to punish anyone who criticizes her. Pattern of manipulative behavior. Multiple men involved. The implication never stated, just heavily scaffolded that she was something between a criminal associate and a professional manipulator of wealthy Korean men. Her face was everywhere in it. Her body, her skin, her dress from Valentine's night. The comment section was in the hundreds of thousands by the time she closed the tab. She sat on the floor of her apartment, back against the bed, and breathed. Not crying. She wasn't crying yet. And she was distantly aware that the not crying was costing her something she would need later. But the floor felt necessary, the solidity of it, the straightforward factual quality of a surface that did not move. Her phone started ringing. Hana. She let it go to voicemail. It rang again. She let that go too. The 3rd call was a number she didn't recognize, and she didn't answer it. But she thought about Seo Kwan His voice saying dangerous, and she felt the architecture of what had happened become clear to her in the specific way that things became clear when the shock thinned enough to let the structure show through. The video had production quality. It had surveillance footage. It had the Tae-jun clips integrated in a way that suggested access to the original files, not just the public stream. It had been distributed across multiple platforms simultaneously, which required either a team or someone who knew the ecosystem well enough to work it alone very quickly. Seokwon, she thought. Or someone Seokwon had access to. She called Jae-min. Picked up before the first ring finished, which meant he was already holding the phone. I know, he said. How long? 20 minutes. My people are working on the distribution platforms now. Can you take it down? A pause. Fractional, but she caught it. Most of it. Not all. Some of it has already been re-uploaded enough times that. So it exists, she said. Permanently. In some form. Yes. She pressed her free hand flat against the floor. Who made it? Another pause. Longer. She felt the pause like a physical thing. Jae-min. I'm not certain yet. You have a suspicion. Zuri. Tell me, I'm going to handle this, he said. That's not an answer to what I asked. No, he said. It isn't. The quality of his voice had changed in a way she was still learning to read, quieter but denser, like something compressing. There are people within my organization who believe your presence is a liability, she said. Yes, she absorbed this. The floor was very solid, so this came from inside your organization. I believe so, which means the people who are supposed to be dismantling what happened to me on Valentine's night are also the people who built the next version of it. Silence, he said. She thought about Seokwon, about his folder of documents and his calibrated voice and the way he had said dangerous with the flat specificity of a man using a professional vocabulary. He's trying to make you choose, she said. He's been trying to make me choose since February 15th, Jae-min said. This is an escalation of that. And what do you choose? I choose, he stopped. And in the stop, she heard something she hadn't heard from him before. Something raw and unmanaged beneath the compression. I choose you. Clearly, he stopped again. Started differently. I'm not good at this part. I've had 12 years of practicing the other part. Part where you don't choose people, she said. Yes. She sat on her floor. Outside her apartment window, Seoul was happening at full morning volume. Indifferent as always. The university, she said. Her voice had gone flat in a way she didn't quite intend. Are they going to pull the showcase? They're discussing it. The administration received the video this morning from 3 separate sources. Someone sent it to them. Yes, this morning. Hours after it went up. Yes. She thought about her collection. About the seamstresses in Itaewon who had already started cutting. About the women she had designed the pieces for the specific women, not a concept. Actual women with bodies and names who had agreed to walk a runway for the first time because she had asked them and because she had made them feel she hoped that this was worth doing. I have to go in, she said, to the university. Today. I'll have someone. Alone, she said. I'll go alone. He didn't argue, which was, she thought, either profound respect for her judgment or evidence that he was already making other plans she couldn't see. With him it was possible it was both. Zuri, he said. What? I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Tae-jun before Seokwon did. She thought about accepting it quickly, which would have been easier. She chose not to. I know, she said. We'll talk about it properly when this is over. She hung up. She got up from the floor. She showered, dressed, made coffee she didn't drink, and looked at herself in the small mirror by her apartment door. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had been sleeping badly for 2 weeks and had just watched herself reduced, again, to a collection of characteristics that the world had decided made her a story about other people's power rather than her own. She held her own gaze in the mirror for a long moment. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. The university administrator's name was Park Jun-ho, and he had the specific uncomfortable energy of a man who had been handed a problem he did not want and was now going to explain very carefully why the problem was actually hers. We understand. This is an extremely difficult situation, he began. Then let's not make it more difficult, she said. Is the showcase being canceled? He shuffled papers. An actual shuffle, physical, which told her the conversation had been rehearsed, and this wasn't the opening he'd prepared for. There are concerns, he said, about the institution's position relative to ongoing public controversy. Controversy, she said, is that I was publicly humiliated at a restaurant, and then the people responsible for that humiliation made a second video to punish me for pursuing accountability. She kept her voice level. What aspect of that creates a problem for the institution's position? The association with he stopped, chose his words. The individuals you've been publicly linked to. A man who stepped in when your student was being harassed on Valentine's night, she said. That association. Miss Adeyemi, I have been a student at this university for 14 months. My showcase collection represents approximately 8 months of work. The technical specifications have been reviewed by 3 faculty members who all graded them at distinction level. She leaned forward slightly. What I have not done is commit any violation of university policy, of Korean law, or of the basic decency that should be fairly straightforwardly covered by your student protection guidelines. She looked at him. Has anyone filed a formal complaint against me? A pause. No, he said. Then what, specifically, is the grounds for removing me from the showcase? He looked at his desk, then back at her. There is significant pressure from whom? He stopped. She waited. From certain donor stakeholders, he said finally, who have expressed. Which donors? He said a name, a foundation name. She recognized the first word of it, the family name, prominent in Korean luxury manufacturing, a name she had encountered in her research on the Korean fashion industry. A name she had also seen, she realized in the 3 seconds following, in the documents Dorian had shown her. Taejun's management company's parent structure. She sat very still. I see, she said. We are not removing you from the showcase at this time, Park Junho said, which she understood meant, we are under significant pressure to do so and have not yet decided. But we would ask you to consider, in the interest of all parties, whether proceeding with the current collection concept. No, she said. Miss Adeyemi. No, she said again. I won't reconsider the collection. The collection proceeds as designed, or it doesn't proceed. And if it doesn't proceed because the university chooses to capitulate to pressure from people who are connected to what happened to me on Valentine's night, then that is a decision the university makes and lives with. She stood up, and I will make sure it's documented as exactly that. She left his office. In the hallway, she stopped walking, put her back against the wall, breathed. The donors. The foundation. Taejun's structures reaching into the university's funding. Seokwan's video reaching the administration the same morning it went live. Pressure arriving from multiple directions, simultaneously, timed, coordinated. Not the slow grinding of institutional discomfort, but something faster and more deliberate. This was not one person retaliating. This was a system that had decided she needed to disappear from the public conversation, and that system had more reach than she had understood when she chose visibility over Jae-min's offer of quiet protection. She had chosen visibility. She stood in the hallway and felt the full weight of that choice land on her. Then she took out her phone and she called Dorian. The foundation that funds the university's design program, she said when he picked up. The one connected to Taejun's parent structure. How deep does that connection go? Pause, the sound of papers. Deeper than we documented in the initial file, Dorian said slowly. Yes. It goes deeper than we documented. Did Jae-min know? Another pause. Different quality. I don't know what Jae-min knew. Find out, she said, and Dorian find out when he knew it. She hung up. She stood in the hallway of the university building where she had spent 14 months learning to build beautiful things in a city that had spent most of that time, informing her, in one language or another, that beauty had conditions she didn't meet. And she felt, with a clarity that had nothing gentle about it, that she had arrived at a point from which every direction available to her required her to become something harder than she had planned. Collection, the showcase, the women who were going to walk that runway. Jae-min and the question of what he'd known and when. Seokwan, and whatever dangerous meant in the operational vocabulary of a man who had spent 12 years making Jae-min's anger into a weapon. And somewhere at the center of all of it, a 24-year-old woman who had walked into a restaurant on Valentine's night, wanting nothing more than a good evening, and who now stood in a university hallway, understanding that the good evening was gone and would not come back, and that what replaced it was going to require everything she had, and possibly things she hadn't found in herself yet. She pushed off the wall. She walked toward the exit. She had a collection to finish. She finished the collection in 11 days. Not because 11 days was enough, it wasn't. Not really. Not for what she was building, but because 11 days was what she had. And she had learned a long time ago that the gap between enough time and available time was a problem you solved with your hands rather than your calendar. The seamstresses at the Itaewon cooperative worked with her every night that week. Women who had been doing this for decades, who understood the difference between fabric that moved and fabric that performed, who didn't need her to explain why a plus-size gown required different internal architecture than a straight-size version of the same garment, not less, not a compromise, but a different engineering solution to the same fundamental question of how to make cloth do exactly what you need it to do on a body that exists in 3 dimensions rather than the 2 dimensions of a sketch. She slept 4 hours a night on the cooperative's backroom couch twice. She ate whatever Hana brought, and Hana brought things with the regularity of someone who had appointed herself to the position of keeping Zuri functional and was taking the appointment seriously. She did not talk to Jae-min for 6 days. Dorian had called her back on day 2 with the answer she had asked for. The Foundation's connection to Taejun's parent structure was documented in files that dated to 8 months ago. Jae-min had been aware of the Foundation's involvement with the university's design program since October. He had known when he decided to pursue the legal path against Taejun that donor pressure was a potential vector of retaliation against her, specifically. He had not told her. She held that information for the 6 days. Turned it over. Looked at it from multiple angles, the way she looked at a pattern piece before cutting, checking the grain, checking the bias, making sure she understood what she was working with before committing to the irreversible action of the shears. He had not told her because telling her would have required explaining the full depth of the network she was entering, which might have caused her to step back, which, and here was the part she kept returning to, part that didn't resolve cleanly, might have meant she was never protected. Never publicly visible as someone worth protecting. Never positioned in a way that made it costly for Taejun's structure to come after her again. The protection was real. She believed that. She also believed the protection had been calibrated in ways she hadn't consented to because she hadn't been given the information necessary to consent. Those 2 things lived in her simultaneously and refused to resolve into a simpler feeling. On the morning of day 7, she texted him. "The showcase is in 4 days. We need to talk before then." He replied in under 30 seconds. "Tell me where." She chose her studio, her territory, her walls covered in her work, the collection hanging in garment bags along one full wall because the cooperative didn't have storage space for all of it, and she'd had to bring the finished pieces back here. She wanted him to walk into a room that was entirely hers before she said what she had to say. Came alone. No bodyguards in the hallway, or if there were, she didn't see them. He wore a dark coat she hadn't seen before, and he looked, she thought, like someone who had also not been sleeping the prescribed number of hours. He looked at the garment bags first, the row of them, the shapes beneath the fabric covers, the scale of the collection visible even concealed. "Can I see it?" he said. After she said, he turned to her. All right. She had planned what she was going to say. She had run through it enough times, in the cooperative back room, and on the subway, and in the 45 minutes before he arrived that she knew it, the way she knew a pattern, the sequence of it, the logic, where the stress fell. She said it plainly. You knew the Foundation had university connections in October. You knew donor pressure was a retaliatory option they had. You built a legal strategy around me, without telling me the full range of what I was walking into. He didn't argue any of it. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment that was not evasion. She could see him, finding the precise answer, which he did the way he did everything, with a slowness that was not hesitation but care. Because I didn't know yet whether I could protect you from all of it, he said. And I didn't want to show you the full map of the danger until I was certain I had covered enough of the exits. That wasn't your decision to make. No, he said. It wasn't. I'm not someone you manage the information flow to, she said. I'm not one of your people who receives what they need to know and not what they don't. I am a person who was already in this situation without choosing it, and you had information that was relevant to my choices, and you decided on my behalf, without my knowledge that I didn't need it yet. Yes, he said again. Same word. Different weight. That's the same logic, she said, that Seo Kwan used. Deciding what I should know for my own good. Something moved through his face. Sharp and quick. That's he stopped. Tell me it's different. It's different because Seo Kwan was trying to remove you from the equation. I was trying to keep you in it safely. The outcome for my ability to make an informed choice was identical, she said. I didn't have the information. That's the same. He looked at her. And she watched something happen in him that she had not seen before. Not the controlled compression, not the managed stillness, but something underneath those things giving way slightly. Like a structure that had been holding a particular weight for too long, acknowledging, privately, that the weight was real. You're right, he said. She had expected resistance. The absence of it threw her slightly off the prepared sequence. I know I'm right, she said. I need to know it won't happen again. It won't. I need to know that because you understand why, not because you're telling me what I need to hear right now. Because you are the only person in my life in 12 years who has stood in front of me and told me that my judgment about what other people need to know is not automatically correct, he said. And because every time I look at this room, he gestured, briefly, at the garment bags, the sketches, the organized evidence of her work. I understand that you have been making your own decisions about what you need, with the information available to you, in conditions that I helped create without your knowledge. And the decisions you've made are, he stopped, better than mine were, in terms of what they cost you versus what they built. She looked at him. That's a very thorough answer, she said. I had 6 days to prepare it. Something shifted in her chest. Small and involuntary. I know about Seo Kwan, she said. I know. It was his team that made the video. Dorian confirmed it this morning. I know too. What are you going to do? I've already started, he said. That's the other thing I needed to tell you. What he had started was the kind of dismantling that happened quietly, and then all at once. Dorian had delivered a complete financial documentation package to 3 separate regulatory bodies, not through Jae-min's usual channels, which had their own ambiguity, but through a law firm that operated at arm's length from any connection to the organization. Clean hands, verifiable chain of custody, the kind of submission that wouldn't be dismissed on procedural grounds. Taejun's management company's tax situations had become critical. 2 sponsors had now fully severed. The third was in emergency PR management. The content platforms had received formal legal notice regarding the distribution of material that violated Korean laws on defamation and privacy, and had responded with the cautious speed of companies that did not want to become defendants in a high-profile case. The Aurelia room had been shuttered for inspection by labor authorities. Lim Sang-sim had resigned. 3 of the undocumented workers had formally engaged with the labor advocacy organization, and 1 had agreed to speak on record. Yuna's academic misconduct review had expanded to include evidence of the January communications with Taejun's team. The university's ethics board had suspended her pending the outcome. And Seo Kwan was the part that Jae-min told her last, and told her carefully. He's been building his own exit strategy for 4 months, Jae-min said. I didn't know the extent of it. Suspected he was uncomfortable with the direction I was going, with the legitimate restructuring, with the changes I was making, but I didn't understand until this week how far he'd gone in terms of parallel operations. He paused. The video was partly retaliation against you. It was also partly a test. He wanted to see whether I would choose protecting my operational stability over— He didn't finish that sentence the way he'd started it. Over you. And you chose wrong, she said. From his perspective. Yes. So what does he do next? Jae-min looked at her with an expression recognized. She recognized now as the one he wore when he was choosing how much to tell her. She watched him consciously override that habit. He has leverage, Jae-min said. Historical documentation of organizational activity that predates the restructuring. If he makes that public, or selectively to specific parties, it creates significant problems. For me, for people who have worked with me. He paused. He knows this. He's been holding it as insurance for years, without me knowing he'd formalized it. Would he use it? If he believed I was genuinely stepping away from everything he helped build, Jae-min stopped. Yes, she stood in her studio surrounded by her work, and she looked at this man who had entered her life 14 days ago by placing his coat around her shoulders in a restaurant where strangers were throwing money at her feet. And she thought about the specific calculus of a person who had spent 12 years building power as a response to powerlessness, and was now, for the first time, encountering the cost of dismantling it. What are you going to do? She said. I'm going to deliver everything to the authorities myself, he said. All of it. The organization's operations, the financial structure, the network, everything I built and everything I inherited and everything that happened in between. He held her gaze. Before Seo Kwon can use it as a weapon, I'll make it into a different kind of document. She understood what he was saying, the full weight of it. That's the end of everything you spent 12 years building, she said. The beginning of everything I should have built instead, he said, which is also what you've been doing. Since before I met you. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she unzipped the nearest garment bag. She showed him the collection. Showcase night arrived with the specific quality of significant evenings, an atmosphere that announces itself before anything has happened, a charge in the air that everyone in the building registers and nobody acknowledges out loud. Zuri arrived 4 hours early. The space the university used for the showcase was a converted industrial hall that had been running events for 15 years, and it had the accumulated atmosphere of every performance. It had hosted a particular smell of old fabric and lighting rigs and the specific anxiety of people about to be seen. She had always found it steadying. Tonight it felt different, larger. The whisper campaign had not stopped. The video still existed in fragmented form across several platforms. Certain industry accounts had posted carefully worded commentary about the controversy surrounding the student designer and the question of whether the showcase was the appropriate venue for, as one account had phrased it, a politically charged collection. 2 of the external guests who had initially confirmed attendance had quietly withdrawn. A journalist from a fashion publication that Zuri had respected had submitted a request for a pre-show statement, which she had declined. She had sent one communication to one person the night before. The outreach Dorian had drafted for the 4 women named in Tai Jun's prior harassment files. She had rewritten it herself, in full, which had taken most of an evening, and she had sent it with a note that said, "You don't owe anyone your story. This is only if you want it. Either way, I'm going ahead." 2 of them had responded. One said, "I'll be watching." The other said, "I'll be there." Zuri had read both responses standing in the cooperative, surrounded by finished garments, and she had not cried. But she had stood very still for approximately 2 minutes before she could move again. The models arrived at 2 o'clock, 6 women. She had worked with each of them individually over the preceding weeks, not in the way designers sometimes worked with models, as bodies to fit fabric to, but as collaborators in the specific project of making something true. She had taken their measurements, and she had talked to them about how clothes had made them feel, about rooms they had walked into wearing something they loved and felt seen in, and rooms they had walked into wearing something chosen by someone else's idea of what they should look like, about the gap between those 2 experiences and what lived in it. The garments fit them, the way garments fit when the person who made them understood that fit was not about minimizing, but about precision. Not about concealing, but about intention. The midnight gown, the final look, the one she was sector, herself was hanging in the dressing area when she arrived, and she looked at it for a long time without touching it. Gold and midnight. The construction was the most complex thing she had ever built. It had taken her 14 days in the middle of everything else, and it contained, in its architecture, every technical lesson she had learned in 14 months of studying in a city that had simultaneously trained her and made her feel unwelcome, and she could see every hour of it in the seams, and she was not embarrassed by that. Hannah appeared at 3. She came backstage with the energy she always carried, and she stopped when she saw the gown, and she said nothing for a moment. Zuri, she said. I know. No. I mean, Hannah turned to look at her. I've seen a lot of things my brother has brought into this building. Art and objects, and collects things that are important to him, specific things, and I can always tell the ones that matter because he won't talk about them with me. She stopped. He's in the front row. He came 2 hours early. He told the front of house people he had a scheduling conflict and needed to confirm the seating arrangement, and they believed him. Zuri looked at her. He was nervous, Hannah said. I have seen my brother face down 12 people who wanted him dead in a parking garage in Mapo, and he was calm. Tonight, he checked the seating chart 3 times. Zuri looked at the gown. Go away, Hannah, she said, but not unkindly. Hannah went. The show started at 7. The first 5 looks went out in the sequence she had planned, each woman moving with the specific quality of someone who has been told, convincingly, that the space they are walking through belongs to them. The audience's response was careful, in the way that audiences are careful when they haven't decided yet what they're seeing, not cold, but reserved, withholding the full weight of their reaction until they understood what they were being asked to feel. Backstage, Zuri watched each look leave and come back, and she made the minute adjustments that needed making, and she said the things to each woman that she knew that particular woman needed to hear. Not generic encouragement, the specific thing. She had paid enough attention to know. The 6th look was the last one before hers. She was reaching for the clasp on the 7th model's necklace when her phone vibrated on the dressing table. She looked at it without thinking. Reflex. A message from a number she didn't have saved, but recognized from 2 weeks ago. He's made his choice. Now I'll make mine. Tell him I said goodbye. Seo Kwan. She grabbed her phone and called Jae-min. No answer, she called again. The 6th model was walking. She could hear the shift in the audience, the quality of attention changing, a sound that wasn't quite applause yet, but was building toward it. The intermission between the 6th and 7th look was 90 seconds. Her gown was on the rack 12 feet away. She called Hannah. Hannah picked up on the first ring. He left, Hannah said, and she heard something in Hannah's voice she had never heard before, not panic exactly, but the edge of it. 20 minutes ago, he got a message and he left and he didn't tell me where. Seo Kwan, Zuri said. It's Seo Kwan. Call Dorian right now and tell him. Tell him the message said goodbye. Call Dorian. She hung up. The 6th model came off the runway. 90 seconds. The gown was on the rack. She could hear the audience through the backstage partition, hundreds of people who had come to see a showcase, who had no idea, who were sitting in the dark, waiting for the final look with the specific held-breath quality of an audience that had already decided this was worth their attention. She thought about sitting this out. For approximately 4 seconds, with the phone in her hand and Seo Kwan's message on the screen, she thought about walking to the production manager and saying there was an emergency and the final look was canceled. Then she thought about what the final look was, what it was built to do, who it was built for, the 6 women who had walked. The 2 responses to Dorian's outreach. The woman near the Aurelia room window who had gone still. The women in the cooperative who had stayed until midnight 3 nights running. Her grandmother in Ibadan who had taught her that fabric held the intention of whoever cut it. She put the phone down. She put on the gown. It took her 45 seconds to dress, which was not enough hands, but she had planned for this, and the construction accommodated it. She had planned for everything she could plan for. Everything else was happening outside this room, in a city that had spent 14 months informing her that she was the wrong size and the wrong color, in the wrong place. She walked to the stage entrance. The light beyond the curtain was very bright. She could hear her heartbeat, not dramatically, just clearly, the way you hear your heartbeat in the specific quality of silence that precedes something irreversible. The music shifted. The cue she had selected, specific and deliberate, something that moved from restraint into fullness over its first 30 seconds, which was the amount of time she needed to walk the length of the runway and reach the end of it. She stepped through the curtain. The light hit her. The audience was there, she could feel them, before she could see them clearly, the massive attention, directed, held. She walked. Not performing a walk, not the particular gait that runway models trained for years to achieve, but her own walk, the walk she had been walking her whole life, the one that took up exactly the space it took up, and did not apologize for it. The gown moved the way she had built it to move. She felt it, the weight of the construction, the deliberate architecture of it, the way the gold caught the stage light and did with it exactly what she had intended when she had sat at 2 a.m. in the cooperative and understood, finally, how to solve the technical problem of the skirt's movement. She reached the end of the runway. She stopped. For a long moment, nobody moved. She stood there, at the end of the runway, in the dress she had made for herself, in the body she had been told too many times to list was insufficient. In the city that had tried very hard to convince her, she needed its permission to exist in it beautifully. And then the room erupted. Not polite applause. Not the careful, reserved response from earlier in the show. Something that came from below calculation, from whatever part of a room full of people still responds to things that are simply, undeniably true. She stood in it. She let it be what it was. And in the front row, she found Jae-min's empty seat. She was still in the gown when Dorian called. Backstage, the other models around her, the noise of the post-show coming through the partition, photographers being redirected by the production assistant because Zuri had said no press access backstage, and she had meant it. She was still in the gown, holding her phone with both hands, when Dorian's name appeared on the screen. "Where is he?" she said. "Han River Freight Terminal," Dorian said. His voice had the clipped quality of someone managing multiple things simultaneously. Industrial zone near Mapo Bridge. Seo-kwan pulled Hana, a pause, a breath. Hana was taken from the building approximately 40 minutes ago. During the show, one of Seo-kwan's people was in the venue. The floor did not move, but it felt like it did. "She's at the terminal?" Zuri said. "Seo-kwan has her. He contacted Jae-min with one condition." Dorian's voice was careful. "Leave you. Terminate every connection to you publicly and permanently, and end the restructuring process." Or he stopped. Or Hana, Zuri said. He gave a deadline. Sunrise. She looked at the gown, at the gold and midnight of it, at the stage light still visible through the partition gap. "Terminal address," she said. "Send it to me right now." Dorian. A pause. Her phone vibrated with the address. She was already moving toward the exits when she heard the production assistant calling her name from somewhere behind the partition, something about photographers, something about the industry guests who wanted to speak with her, something about the standing ovation that was still audible, even here, even now, the sound of it following her down the backstage corridor, like something she was not yet ready to receive but was going to need to. She was still in the gown when she got into the car. There was no time to change, and she didn't try. The production assistant was still calling her name somewhere behind the backstage partition, and the standing ovation had faded into the particular murmur of a crowd transitioning from witnessed experience to commentary on it. And Zuri walked through the side exit of the converted industrial hall into the February air and felt the cold hit the exposed skin of her shoulders like a correction. The driver Dorian had sent was already at the curb. She got in. The city moved past the windows in the way it always did, relentless, indifferent. Every light and surface and body on the street participating in their own specific urgency without any awareness of hers. She watched it and felt the gown around her, and thought about the 14 days she had spent building it, the specific intention she had cut into every seam, the thing she had been trying to make true by making it. She took out her phone, called Jae-min again. This time he picked up. The sound behind him was wind and distance, and something mechanical, the ambient noise of a large industrial space, metal and water moving. "Don't come here," he said immediately. "Where is Hana?" "She's here. She's not hurt." A pause. Something that might have been him moving. "Zuri, I need you to stay where you are. Dorian sent me the address." "I know. I asked him not to." His voice was controlled, but she could hear the effort of it, the compression applied to something that wanted to be louder. "This is between me and Seo-kwan. It has nothing to do with you." Hana is there because of me, she said. Hana is there because Seo Kwan made a decision. That's not the same thing, Jae-min. Zuri, I'm already in the car, she said. I'll be there in 12 minutes. She hung up. She looked out the window at Seoul, passing at 40 kilometers an hour, and she thought about 12 years and what they build in a person, the weight of them, the specific gravity of a life organized entirely around control as a substitute for safety. She thought about Seo Kwan in a cafe in Mapo, with his document folder and his calibrated voice, and she thought about the word dangerous. And she thought about what a man does when the thing he built his identity around, the usefulness of another person's anger, starts becoming something else. The terminal appeared ahead. She felt it before she saw the sign, the quality of the air changing, the smell of the Han River coming through the car's ventilation, something industrial and cold and very old. Stop here, she said. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror. Ms. Adeyemi, I have instructions. Stop the car, she said. He stopped. She got out. The freight terminal was the kind of structure that had been enormous once and had been deteriorating into enormousness ever since a warehouse complex that had served the river trade when the river trade meant something, now partly decommissioned, partly used for storage, the kind of place that cities accumulate along their water edges like sediment. The Han visible between buildings, black and wide and indifferent. Wind moving through the gaps in the corrugated walls with a sound like something breathing badly. She found the main entrance by following the light. Two of Jaemin's men were outside. She recognized one of them from the estate, a large, quiet man who had brought her tea on the first morning without being asked. He stepped forward when he saw her. Ms. Adeyemi. Is she inside? Zuri said. He looked at her for a moment. At the golden midnight gown, completely wrong for a freight terminal, at 11 at night in February, and at her face, which was expressing something he apparently decided not to argue with. Loading bay 3, he said straight through. She went in. The inside of the terminal smelled like rust and river water and something chemical she couldn't name. The lights were emergency industrial, mounted high, casting everything in a flat sodium yellow that made depth hard to read. She moved through a corridor of stacked containers and heard voices before she saw anyone, not words. Just the acoustic shape of a confrontation. The particular quality of sound that happens when two people are speaking at each other without any pretense of conversation. She came around the edge of a loading barrier and saw them. Hana first. She was against the far wall, her hands bound in front of her with zip ties, seated on a crate with a man standing nearby who was not Seo Kwan and was not Jae-min, and was watching her with the attentive blankness of someone performing a professional function. Hana looked up when Zuri appeared, and her expression did something complicated relief and fear, and a fierce, specific anger that Zuri recognized because she had been wearing a version of it herself for 2 weeks. Jae-min was 20 feet from Seo Kwan, and Seo Kwan was not what she had expected. She had built a picture of him from the cafe meeting the controlled man, the patient man, the man with his document folder, and his calibrated voice delivering calculated information in measured doses. That man was still present in the body in front of her, but the calibration had slipped. Coat was open. His hair, which had been immaculate in Mapo, was disordered from the wind. He was holding a phone in his left hand and something else in his right, something small, and it took her 2 seconds to understand that the something else was the physical trigger component of whatever system he'd wired into this building. And another second to register the meaning of the wired components she could now see, attached at intervals along the nearest wall. Not explosives. She looked more carefully. Fire suppression override the terminal's emergency system, rigged to trigger manually rather than through the automated circuit, which meant he could flood the building with suppression agent at will, which meant he could eliminate visibility, and a lot of other things. You came, Seo Kwan said, not to Jae-min, to her. His voice was different than it had been in Mapo. Still precise, but the patience had been replaced by something rawer. A man who had been preparing for a specific outcome and was now watching the variables rearrange themselves. You texted me, she said. You said goodbye. That felt like an invitation. Jae-min turned his head slightly at the sound of her voice. His face, in the sodium yellow light, was the most unmanaged. She had seen it, not the controlled surface, not the deliberate stillness, but the thing underneath those things with most of the covering stripped away. She watched him register the gown, register that she had come from the showcase directly. Something moved through his expression and was immediately suppressed, but not before she saw it. "This isn't a conversation for you," Jae-min said to her. "You keep telling me that," she said. "I keep being already in the room." "Zuri, I'm here," she said. "Let's work with what's true." Seokwon looked between them. Whatever he saw in the looking, it didn't improve his expression. "Spent 12 years," he said. He was talking to Jae-min now, the particular address of someone delivering a verdict they've been composing for a long time. 12 years building the thing you needed, after your mother. When you had nothing and you wanted the city to pay, and you didn't know yet how to make it pay. Taught you. He paused. I gave you the architecture, the organization, the network, everything you used to become something this city couldn't ignore. I know, Jae-min said, and now you're going to hand it to prosecutors, Seokwon said. Because of her. No, Jae-min said. Because I should have started earlier. Seokwon's hand tightened on the trigger component. Not enough to activate it, but enough to see. She's made you soft, he said. She's made me think about what I built and what it cost, Jae-min said. That's different, is it? Seokwon's voice was sharp now, the patience entirely gone. You built something real, something that protected people, something that made sure that what happened to your mother couldn't just happen, without consequence, without someone answering for it. He looked at Zuri. And this woman walks into your restaurant, and you throw it away. She wasn't in my restaurant, Jae-min said. She was in a room where someone was filming her humiliation for content. I walked in. You walked in, because you recognized her from Hana's description, Seokwon said. Because Hana told you about a woman who helped her at Hongdae Station, and you'd been carrying that around for months like he stopped. The rawness in his voice had reached something that wasn't anger anymore. 12 years, Jae-min. 12 years I watched you not carry anything. Not one person. And then, Jae-min said quietly. Silence. The wind moved through the terminal walls. The Han River continued outside, black and wide and very old. You're afraid, Zuri said. Seokwon looked at her. Excuse me, not of losing the organization, she said. She kept her voice even not soft, not challenging, just clear. Of what you are without it, without him needing it, without the thing you built being the thing that holds everything together. She looked at him. If Jae-min steps away from what you made, then what you made stops being the center of his life. And you built your life around being the person who held the center of his. The man near Hana shifted slightly. Hana did not look at him. She was watching Zuri with an expression of concentrated stillness. Seokwon's jaw moved. You're 24 years old, he said. Yes, she said. And I know what it feels like to build your entire identity around surviving something. To make yourself so good at the survival that you forget there was supposed to be something after it. She held his gaze. He didn't throw away what you built. He outgrew the reason he needed it. That's not the same thing, and you know that. Don't, Seokwon started. What happened to his mother was real, she said. What you built in response to it was real. Protection was real. I'm not dismissing any of it. But you have been feeding his anger for 12 years because his anger made him predictable, and a predictable Jae-min needed you. And now he doesn't, and you don't know who you are without that. Seokwon's hand, the one with the trigger, was shaking. Not much, barely visible, but she saw it. Let Hana go, she said. You don't give orders here. I'm not giving an order. I'm asking. She took one step forward. Jae-min moved slightly not toward her, but the quality of his attention shifted in a way she registered as readiness. She didn't stop. She has nothing to do with any of this. You know that. You've known her since she was a child. Whatever you're proving right now, she isn't the proof. Seokwon looked at Hana. For a long moment he looked at Hana, who looked back at him with the expression of someone who had known this man for most of her conscious life and was currently sitting on a crate with zip-tied hands because of a decision he had made. And the complexity of that look, what it contained, what it cost both of them, was not something Zuri could fully read, but she felt the weight of it in the air between them. Co Kwan nodded to the man near Hana. The man produced a knife small, folding and cut the zip ties. Hana stood up. She looked at Co Kwan for one more second, with that same complicated expression, and then she moved. Not running, walking, steadily toward Zuri. Zuri felt Hana reach her side, and she felt Hana's hand find her arm and grip it, hard, and she put her own hand over Hana's without looking away from Co Kwan. Now, Jae-min said. His voice had returned to the compressed quality, but it was different now, not the controlled surface, but something that had been decided. The trigger. Put it down. Co Kwan looked at him. If I put it down, he said, there's nothing left. There's still a choice, Jae-min said. Between what? Between what you do next and what you've already done. Jae-min took one step forward. The documentation you've held the insurance package. I know you delivered copies to 2 parties already. Dorian's been tracking the distribution chain for a week. Done. Whatever damage it does, it does. I can't stop that and I'm not going to spend energy trying. He paused. But you can still walk out of this building and into a conversation with the same law firm I've been working with. And that conversation goes differently if you come in before the morning rather than after. Seok-Kwon stared at him. You're offering me, I'm telling you what exists, Jae-min said. I'm not offering anything. I don't have the standing to offer you a resolution. The law firm does. The regulatory bodies do. His voice was very level. I have spent 12 years being the person who decided what other people's options were. I'm done with that. I'm telling you what the options actually are and leaving the decision to you. Seok-Kwan's hand was still shaking. Then, slowly, with the specific quality of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally felt the exact moment when holding it costs more than releasing it, he set the trigger down on the concrete floor. The sound it made was small, almost nothing, a piece of plastic on wet concrete. Jae-min exhaled. Zuri felt Hana's grip on her arm loosen, just slightly, and understood that Hana had been holding herself together through the grip and was now permitting herself to stop. Outside she heard cars, the sound of additional vehicles arriving. Dorian, she thought, or the authorities, or both. The timeline had compressed in a way that meant the next hour was going to be loud and procedural and would require things from both her and Jae-min that neither of them had the remaining capacity for. And she knew this. And she also knew that the next hour was not the part that mattered. Seok-Kwan looked at her one more time. His expression was not what she expected. Not defeat, exactly. Something more complicated. The face of a man seeing, perhaps for the first time, a version of the story he'd been inside that he hadn't been able to see from within it. He's right, he said to her, not what she expected him to say. You are dangerous. I know, she said. Not for the reasons you meant. He picked up the trigger component from the floor and handed it to the nearest of Jae-min's men, who had appeared from the corridor at some point in the last minutes. Then he put his hands in his coat pockets, and he waited, with the stillness of someone who has made his final calculation, for whatever was coming through the door. The next 4 hours were exactly what she had predicted. Loud, procedural, demanding things from everyone that the night had not left them well equipped to give. Statements were given, documents were logged. The law firm Jae-min had been working with had people on site within 30 minutes. She didn't ask how. She was past asking how, and they moved through the terminal with the efficient calm of people who had been briefed and were executing a plan that had been prepared well before tonight. Seok-Kwan's man was detained. Seok-Kwan himself was processed with a quietness that was either cooperation or exhaustion or both. And she didn't look too long at him after the first few minutes because looking at him required her to hold too many things simultaneously, and she was running low. Hana sat beside her on a bench near the terminal entrance, with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that someone had produced from somewhere. And she was quiet in a way that was different from her usual quality of quiet, which was never actually quiet, but simply energy directed inward. This was genuine stillness. Stillness of someone processing something that hadn't finished arriving yet. Are you hurt? Zuri asked at one point. No, Hana said. Then my wrists are sore. I know. Someone will look at them. I'm fine. A pause. You came in a ball gown. I didn't have time to change. You came in a ball gown to a freight terminal to talk a man with a trigger device into putting it down. Hana looked at the coffee cup. I'm going to think about that for a very long time. Don't make it into a thing, Zuri said. It is a thing. Hana, I'm just saying. Zuri looked at her hands. There was a small tear in the gown's left seam, at the hip, where she had moved too quickly through a gap between tainers, and caught the fabric. She looked at the tear for a moment, the thread pulling, the integrity of the seam compromised, and felt something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite humor, and landed somewhere between the two. She had built this dress to walk a runway. It had walked somewhere else. She thought her grandmother would have found that appropriate. Jae-min came and sat on her other side, sometime after 2 in the morning. He sat the way he had sat beside her in the car, on Valentine's night leaving room, not claiming space that hadn't been offered. She had never quite stopped noticing that about him. It was the kind of thing you noticed differently once you knew enough about a person to understand how it had been learned. Dorian's people are with the regulatory contacts, he said. The full package goes in at 8 this morning. Everything. Everything, she repeated. Yes. She looked at the terminal floor, still wet from where the fire suppression system had discharged in one section during the confusion. The sodium lights still running overhead. The sound of the Han River outside, persistent. What does it look like, she said, after. Significant restructuring of the remaining legitimate businesses. Legal process that will take, he paused, years. Probably. I have good counsel. He paused again. Some periods of significant inconvenience. Is that a euphemism? Partially. She looked at him. At the sight of his face in the bad light, he needed sleep. She needed sleep. They were sitting in a freight terminal at 2 in the morning, and she was wearing a damaged formal gown, and he was wearing yesterday's suit, and the city outside was doing what it always did. You said you were done, being the person who decided what other people's options were, she said. Yes. Did you mean it? I'm saying it to you right now, he said. In this context, yes. In every context. He looked at her. I'm going to make mistakes, he said. In every context. I'm not built for the version of this that doesn't have mistakes in it. I've spent too long organized around a different set of, I'm going to get it wrong sometimes. I want you to know that before he stopped, before whatever comes next. I know, she said. I'm going to get it wrong too. You seem fairly unlikely to. You haven't seen me at 8 in the morning when I've missed deadlines, she said. I'm unreasonable. He was quiet for a moment. I'd like to, he said. Eventually. See that. She looked back at the floor. We'll see, she said. It was she knew, not a no. The showcase review appeared 4 days later in an industry publication that had initially covered the controversy with the careful, both sides neutrality of a platform that didn't want to commit to anything until it could see which way the weight fell. The review committed 400 words, specific and unhedging, about a collection that had, and she read this part twice, accomplished the near impossible task of making the political personal without losing the precision of craft. It named her full name, the label name she had been building in her head for months. Adeyemi Seoul. She had not announced it. She had mentioned it to no one, except Hana once, in passing, the week before the showcase. She found out later that Hana had mentioned it to the interviewer from the publication who had attended the show and had followed up with backstage personnel for context. Hana's version of keeping a secret was, it turned out, similar to Hana's version of keeping quiet, a concept she understood in theory and interpreted generously in practice. Zuri called her about it. You told them my label name, she said. I mentioned it. In passing, Hana, it's a good name. A pause. Are you angry? Zuri looked at the review on her laptop screen. At her full name in 400 words of specific, unhedging language. No, she said. The 3 Vietnamese, American, and Filipino women, 2 of Taijun's prior targets who had responded to Dorian's outreach, both gave statements that were incorporated into the formal complaint filed through the law firm. The French woman, contacted a week later through a different channel, declined to participate, but sent a brief message that Zuri received through Dorian and read alone in her studio. Thank you for not needing us to make it real. She kept that message, printed it, and kept it in the studio, pinned to the board above her cutting table, where she could see it when she was working. Taejun's management company filed for restructuring 6 weeks after the regulatory submissions. 2 platform channels were suspended pending review. Taejun himself made a public statement that his lawyers had clearly written, and that contained a quality of non-apology so refined, it had actually looped back around to being almost impressive in its technical construction. He was gone from the luxury brand partnerships within 90 days. The industry moved on from him in the way industries move on from useful controversies once they've finished being useful. Yuna's academic misconduct case concluded with a formal finding. She withdrew from the university's program before the formal announcement. Zuri did not know where she went after that and did not try to find out. The Aurelia room reopened under new management 6 months later. She never went back. She launched Academy Seoul in October, 11 months after she had first arrived in the city, and learned, gradually and then all at once, which rooms she was expected to make herself smaller to enter. The launch collection had 12 looks, plus-size women. Black women, Korean women, Vietnamese women, women of an age that luxury fashion had historically treated as an expiration. Not positioned as representation, not positioned as statement. Positioned as fashion, which was what it was. The seamstresses from Itaewon were credited on every piece. Not in the fine print, in the primary material. The launch event was not the Aurelia room and was not the university showcase hall. It was a rooftop in Itaewon with views of a city that did not care and could not be made to care, and which she had stopped asking to care because the asking had always been the wrong instinct. The right instinct was building something true until the city could not avoid seeing it. People came, more than she had expected. Industry people she had never met who had watched the showcase coverage and the subsequent months with the specific interest of people in a field that was always searching for the next true thing, which was both mercenary and, occasionally, how true things actually got seen. Hana came. Hana came 2 hours early and spent that time rearranging the seating layout in a way that was subtly but meaningfully better, and Zuri let her. Jae-min came. He stood at the back for the first part of the event in the particular way of a man who had spent years arranging himself in rooms so as to see everything and be seen as little as possible, and then gradually migrated toward the front because Hana had rearranged the seating. And there was a specific seat at the front, and there was a specific seat near the front that happened to have the best sightline, and Hana had, with characteristic lack of subtlety, labeled it with a small folded card that said Ryu. He sat. He watched the collection. She saw his face during the final look, a gold and green piece, different from the showcase gown, but built with the same intention, designed for a body that the industry had spent 50 years treating as a problem to be solved rather than a form to be celebrated. He watched it with an expression that she had learned over the 11 months since Valentine's night was the one he wore when he was feeling something he hadn't expected and was deciding whether to let it show. He let it show. Afterward, when the event had moved into the particular tucent quality of its post-program hour, she found him on the edge of the rooftop with a glass of water because he didn't drink at public events, looking at the city. Well, she said. He looked at the collection through the glass doors behind them. At the people examining the pieces, talking to the seamstresses, moving through the space she had built. You did it, he said. We're at the beginning, she said. This is one collection. I know. He looked at her. You did it anyway. She looked at the city. Seoul in October, the light beginning to change toward the quality it had in late autumn, something in the air that was different from February, warmer and more complicated, the way cities are more complicated when they are not also cold. The legal process, she said. How much longer a while? He said it without evasion. Probably another year before the formal resolutions. Some things longer. And you're all right? He considered. Restructuring. Everything legitimate is running. The other things are in the process of becoming someone else's problem, which is the best I can say for it. Seokwan? His cooperation has been more complete than I expected. A pause. I think he was tired. I think he'd been holding everything together for a long time. And he was tired, and he didn't have a mechanism for stopping that didn't involve forcing a confrontation. He needed an exit, she said. He needed someone to make the exit cost less than the continuation. He paused, which is, I think, what you did, in the terminal. She thought about the trigger component on the wet floor, the small sound it had made. I don't know if I did that, she said. I said things. He made the decision. Yes, Jae-min said. That's the part you're good at. Saying the thing and then leaving the decision where it belongs. She looked at him. You're doing it right now, he said. You've been doing it since February, making the thing true and then letting people decide what to do with the truth. He was quiet for a moment. It's not a small thing. It doesn't feel like enough. Most days, she said. Most things that work don't. She looked back at the city, at the specific texture of it from this height, the layered density of it. The districts she could now identify by sight. The neighborhood she had learned through 14 months of being a student and a stranger. And then, gradually and non-linearly, something closer to a person who lived here. I'm staying, she said, I decided. Adeyemi Seoul is based here. He didn't say anything for a moment. Good, he said. That's all? What would you like me to say? I don't know. She looked at him. Something that reflects the fact that this is a significant decision that I made, partly in the context of certain developments in my life since February. You're asking me to admit that your staying here is relevant to me personally, he said. I'm asking you to be honest. He was quiet for a moment, with a particular quality of someone finding the precise words rather than the available ones. The night in the terminal, he said. When I heard your voice behind me. When I turned and you were there, in that gown, in that place, because you had come from the showcase directly without changing. Because there wasn't time, he stopped. I have been in a significant number of dangerous situations. I have learned over time to manage the experience of them. What I felt when I heard your voice in that terminal is not something I have a category for. She held his gaze. That's a very thorough answer, she said. I had time to prepare it. You said that before. It was true before, too. She looked at the collection through the glass doors. The women wearing her work, walking in her designs, occupying the space she had built for them. Ask me, she said. He looked at her. Ask me the thing you've been deciding whether to ask, she said. He was quiet for long enough that she thought she had miscalculated. Then, would you have dinner with me? Not for any purpose. Not connected to anything else. Just dinner. Yes, she said. This week. Yes. He looked at the city for a moment. Something in his face settled, the way faces settle when something they have been holding in uncertainty finds its place. The rooftop where my organization used to meet, he said. It's been converted, legitimately. There's a restaurant there now. He paused. I thought it was appropriate. To eat somewhere, the space used to mean one thing and now means something else. She thought about February. About a restaurant where money had landed around her feet and a stranger had placed his coat around her shoulders, and 7 words had rearranged the temperature of a room. Yes, she said. That's appropriate. 2 years later, their daughter found the photograph. She was 4, which meant she found it the way 4-year-olds find everything completely, by total immersion, in the drawer where Zuri kept things she had not decided what to do with and had been not deciding for long enough that the drawer had become a kind of archive. The photograph was a still from the Valentine's night stream. Someone had printed it and sent it to Zuri months after the event. She didn't know who, had never found out, and she had not thrown it away, which said something she had never examined too carefully. It showed her at the table, the bills just beginning to fall. Her face in the process of deciding what expression to wear, for the next several seconds, caught in the half-second before the decision fully landed. And the result was an expression that was neither composed nor broken, but something between the two that was more honest than either. Her daughter studied it with the focused attention of a child who takes images seriously. Mommy, she said, why were you crying? Zuri looked at the photograph. Across the garden, Jae-min was building something with their son, a structure out of wooden blocks that had been collapsing repeatedly, which neither of them seemed to find discouraging, which was, she thought, something he had learned. The lanterns Hana had hung, for the occasion, were lit and swaying slightly in the evening air, and the sound of the garden was the sound of people who lived in a space and were at ease in it. She took the photograph from her daughter and held it. The woman in it did not know yet about the coat around her shoulders, about the estate in Yongsan, or the cooperative in Itaewon, or the freight terminal in Mapo, or the rooftop in October, about Adeimi Seoul, or the review that named her, or the collection that closed Seoul Fashion Week in the year following the launch, about the foundation they had built together for immigrants and discrimination survivors and plus-size young women who had been told they were too much of the wrong things to belong anywhere that mattered. The woman in the photograph was 24 years old, and she was sitting in a restaurant where someone had decided her existence content, and she was in the process of choosing, in the next few seconds, what her face was going to do about it. Zuri looked at her daughter. People tried to convince me I wasn't beautiful enough to belong, she said. Her daughter frowned. Were they right? No, she said. She looked back at the garden, at Jae-min and her son and the wooden blocks and the swaying lanterns, at the space they had built together out of two people who had both, in different ways and for different reasons, spent years being told they occupied the wrong kind of space. She took her daughter's hand. I just hadn't learned yet, she said, that I never needed their permission. Her daughter considered this with the gravity of a 4-year-old receiving information she intends to keep. Then she pulled Zuri's hand toward the garden, toward the lanterns and the wooden blocks, and the sound of her brother's frustrated, delighted noise as the structure fell again. And Zuri let herself be pulled, the way she had been learning, slowly and imperfectly, to let good things move her toward where they were going. Behind her, the photograph stayed on the garden table. The woman in it sat in her chair, the bills still falling, the decision still arriving, and the door still closed on the moment before the door opened.